My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. The world did not notice the silence at first. It was buried beneath the noise of trade wars, of political scandals, of collapsing markets and breaking news. But in the deserts of Africa, something was stirring. A low hum beneath the sand, a whisper carried by the wind. Then one morning in early 2025, every European intelligence network lit up at once. Encrypted transmissions between 7 African capitals, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Chad, Ethiopia, and South Africa. The signals were untraceable, bouncing off weather satellites and disappearing into deep space. No one could decipher them. No one knew what they meant. Within hours, reports flooded NATO headquarters. Radar blackouts over parts of the Sahara, GPS disruptions near the Gulf of Guinea, power surges along ancient fiber routes. For the first time in decades, Europe wasn't watching Africa. Africa was watching back. In a dimly lit war room deep in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré stood alone before a holographic map. Blue lines traced across the continent, pulsing like veins. His reflection flickered in the light, calm, unreadable, determined. Behind him, the world was shifting. The cameras that usually followed him, gone. The foreign journalists, expelled. For 6 months, he had said nothing publicly. No speeches, no declarations, just quiet movement. Silent meetings in the night. Handshakes in undisclosed deserts, code exchanged in whispers. And now, the silence had turned into a signal. The hook ends here. And what came next would shake the balance of global power itself. Long before the signal, long before satellites blinked in confusion, there was hunger. Burkina Faso's villages burned under the weight of drought. Children walked for miles for a handful of grain. The fields had cracked open, like the earth itself was tired of being exploited. The world had moved on, or so it thought. Europe discussed climate deals and humanitarian aid in air-conditioned rooms, while the Sahel's dust storms swallowed entire communities. But deep beneath that suffering, something was growing. Not hatred, not revenge, but conviction. A conviction that Africa could no longer wait for rescue. Traoré had seen it all, from the burnt fields of Bouclé de Mouhoun to the empty classrooms where teachers had left for Europe in search of work. He was a soldier, yes, but also a historian of pain. He had read Thomas Sankara's speeches, the ones that spoke of dignity, of self-reliance, of courage in poverty. And every line echoed in his mind. We must dare to invent the future. So he dared. When he came to power, the IMF demanded gold repayments. Western diplomats warned of grave consequences. But Traoré's eyes did not blink. He had begun something even they could not understand. At first it was small, engineers, students, farmers. He summoned them from every corner of Africa. Not soldiers, not mercenaries, but builders. Men and women who could design, innovate, and dream under pressure. They met in abandoned warehouses, forgotten airfields, and burned out mining tunnels once owned by foreign companies. He called it Project Umoja, Swahili for unity. Its purpose was simple on paper: develop a joint defense system to protect African skies. But what lay beneath was far deeper, a declaration of independence hidden in circuits and code. In 2024, while the rest of the world debated inflation, Africa began shipping strange cargo through unmarked convoys. Old Soviet engines from Ethiopia, drone frames from Nigeria, solar crystal wafers from Namibia, even fragments of decommissioned satellites from Ghana. Pieces of a puzzle too complex to be guessed. Unless you were inside the plan, hidden beneath the Sahel dunes, a base was born, invisible from satellites, its walls lined with solar panels camouflaged in sand tones. At night, engineers worked under starlight. During the day, heat waves disguised movement. It was a city of ghosts, alive with quiet purpose. Every night, Traoré walked the unfinished corridors alone. He would touch the metal, feeling its temperature like a pulse. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The workers understood. This was not about a bridge or a weapon. It was about a signal, a declaration to the world that Africa was no longer kneeling, but Europe noticed. In Brussels, officials whispered of a technological uprising. France sent drones. They vanished mid-air. Satellite images showed distortions, strange patterns in the desert that shifted shape every 12 hours. Some thought it was a mirage. Others feared it was something worse. Back in Burkina Faso, rumors spread among villagers. They said Traoré was building a weapon from the future. They said he was guided by ancestors, that his eyes glowed when he looked at the horizon. They said he could see the future of Africa written in the dust. But Traoré didn't care for myths. He cared for survival. He knew unity was fragile. Mali's leadership was fractured. Niger was suffocating under sanctions. Guinea's resources were bleeding into foreign banks. One leak, one betrayal, and Project Umoja would collapse. So he built in shadows. He trusted no one fully. Even his closest advisors didn't know the full scale. Every nation thought they were building a piece of the puzzle. But only Traoré held the full blueprint. One evening, as the desert sun sank blood red, a coded message arrived. The project was ready for first contact. The grid could synchronize 7 nations, 7 networks. One signal, the command center went dark. Generators roared to life. The engineers took their positions, trembling. Traoré stepped forward. He placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The system recognized his pulse. A low hum filled the air. From beneath the sand, thousands of drones began to rise silently, each no larger than a bird, powered by solar resonance. They connected to each other mid-air, forming a vast electromagnetic web across the night sky. It wasn't an attack. It was a shield, invisible, unstoppable, alive. In that moment, for the first time, Africa had a unified defense grid, not one owned by NATO, not one built by foreign contractors, but one born entirely from African soil. The lights flickered. The system stabilized, and then the signal was sent. Across Europe, power stations glitched. Satellites blinked. Communication lines dropped for 4.7 seconds, long enough to terrify governments. When the systems came back online, all they saw was a single message, written in ancient Bambara script. Africa protects its own. That was the day the world realized. Something extraordinary had begun. It wasn't war. It wasn't rebellion. It was awakening. In the following days, European news outlets ran endless headlines. What is Traoré building? Africa's digital Iron Curtain? Burkina Faso's secret grid? They didn't know that the real weapon wasn't technology. It was unity. For the first time in centuries, African nations were not competing, not divided, not silent. They were synchronized. Meanwhile, deep underground, Traoré studied a holographic map, the lines connecting each nation pulsing like a heartbeat. The hum of machines surrounded him, but his thoughts were elsewhere, in the faces of his people, in the memories of hunger and humiliation. Every decision he made was weighed against centuries of suffering. He whispered under his breath, not prayer, but promise. A promise to a continent that had bled for too long, and far above, in the night sky, the first aurora shimmered faintly over the desert, green, gold, and red. The colors of a continent remembering its power. And then, a pulse swept across Africa. The deserts glowed. The satellites trembled, and the world realized too late, the age of silence was over. The world moved uneasily after the signal. In European parliaments, meetings stretched past midnight. Analysts replayed the data again and again, searching for logic, for weakness, for an explanation. But every attempt failed. Africa had done something unthinkable. It had disappeared from the global surveillance grid while still remaining visible. For centuries, Africa had been mapped, monitored, and mined. Every resource, every movement, every whisper had been watched. And now, the map was blank. The satellite feeds showed nothing but sand. But beneath that sand, wires, circuits, data nodes, and dreams pulsed like veins of fire. Project Umoja had entered its second phase. Yet, with unity came friction. Inside the desert command center, Ibrahim Traoré studied a holographic feed, patterns of light tracing from Niger to the Horn of Africa. He could see them pulsing, breathing like living organisms, But not all the lights blinked in rhythm. One cluster, near Mali's border, flickered erratically, lagging behind. There, something was wrong. Reports began to trickle in. Stolen shipments, intercepted messages, unexplained power losses. Someone within the alliance was leaking information. At first, it seemed like human error. Then the sabotage became deliberate. In Bamako, an officer close to the Malian chief of defense vanished. In Guinea, the lead engineer responsible for encryption was found dead, a lab accident. In Niamey, a storage facility holding quantum drives went up in flames. And in every instance, the same insignia appeared, a serpent curled around a sword. It was a message. The mark of betrayal. Europe had found its way back in. A web of intelligence operatives, tech contractors, and economic envoys had infiltrated the very core of the alliance. They didn't use guns or armies. They used debt, data, and doubt. The IMF had moved quietly. After the signal, they froze Burkina Faso's reserves, suspended aid to Mali, and pressured neighboring states to reconsider their involvement in Traoré's initiative. Fuel shipments stopped arriving. Medicine grew scarce. Food prices doubled overnight. Panic crept in. The same despair that had once united the people now began to divide them. Whispers spread through the soldiers' camps. Was Traoré leading them to salvation? Or to ruin? Traoré didn't flinch. He moved from city to city in secret, visiting each base, talking not as a ruler, but as a man among them. He shared their bread, their dust, their sleepless nights. He reminded them that every sacrifice had a price, and every revolution, a moment of darkness before dawn. But his heart was heavy. He knew time was running out. Europe would not wait for Africa to finish building. The sanctions were designed to starve the project from within. Still, the alliance pressed on. In Addis Ababa, scientists worked on electromagnetic dampeners that could blind foreign satellites. In South Africa, solar engineers built prototype batteries capable of powering cities off-grid. In Niger, geologists discovered something extraordinary: rare conductive minerals buried deep under ancient dunes, capable of amplifying signal strength by hundreds of times. They called it Earth's nerve, and suddenly Project Umoja became more than a defense network. It became a living being, powered not just by technology, but by the very soil of Africa itself. But darkness followed discovery. The deeper they dug, the more they uncovered traces of another presence. Someone had been there before them. Ancient blueprints were found, designs etched into metal fragments predating colonial times. Complex equations written in symbols no one could decipher. It was as if someone, centuries earlier, had envisioned what Umoja was becoming. The scientists were baffled. Traoré only stared at the fragments in silence. He didn't see science. He saw legacy. A continuation of something long buried by colonization, now resurfacing through faith and defiance. But others saw opportunity. A small faction within the alliance began negotiating secretly with a European consortium, promising to sell fragments of the mineral and data from the system. They wanted money, power, status. The same poison Africa had swallowed for generations. And when Traoré discovered it, his silence turned into storm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't punish them. He simply shut down their sectors, remotely, silently. Entire networks went dark. To the outside world, it looked like a failure. To Traoré, it was purification. Meanwhile, Europe tightened its noose. A covert operation, Project Marrow, was launched by an alliance of European states. Its objective: sabotage Umoja from within by exploiting the weakest link: human hunger. Agents infiltrated supply lines, replaced shipments with spoiled food, and spread disinformation through social media. Traoré is building a weapon that will enslave Africa under his control. He is Sankara reborn, but this time with fire. Fear spread like wildfire. Even within his own military, loyalty began to fracture. A group of generals in Burkina Faso met secretly, debating whether to contain Traoré before he destroyed the country. They planned to dismantle Umoja and hand control to international observers in exchange for restored trade. But the plan never reached execution. Because by then, Traoré already knew. He sat alone that night in his bunker, the flicker of monitors lighting his face. He read the intercepted transmissions, his own generals conspiring behind his back. And for the first time, the burden of leadership weighed like chains. He thought of Sankara, of how betrayal came not from enemies but from brothers, of how history repeats itself until someone decides to rewrite it. He could act, purge them all, but doing so would fracture the alliance. So he chose the harder path, silence and endurance. He would let the traitors believe they were winning, because the true weapon of Umoja was not force, it was timing. In the meantime, ordinary people were suffering. Families displaced by droughts wandered the desert seeking food. Markets were empty. Hospitals had no medicine. And yet, in every village, children still painted Traoré's face on walls, half hero, half myth. They didn't understand the politics, but they felt the change. They felt that something sacred was being built. Not for them, but with them. They whispered a new phrase in the streets. Africa's dawn begins at night. And so, hope persisted, fragile, flickering, but alive. As weeks passed, the network grew stronger. Engineers discovered a new algorithm that allowed the drones to self-organize using magnetic fields, eliminating the need for central servers. It meant that even if one base was destroyed, the others would remain functional, decentralized, unstoppable. It was the same principle that defined Africa itself. Many tribes, one spirit. But with every success came a shadow. Europe was no longer watching quietly. High-altitude spy planes began circling over the Sahel, disguised as weather drones. Satellite jammers appeared along the Mediterranean coast. And deep in the Atlantic, naval signals began aligning for something more, an intervention. The alliance intercepted the data. They knew an operation was coming. They just didn't know when. Traoré assembled his closest commanders and laid out the map. 7 nations stood at the edge of a storm. If they failed now, all would be lost. Not just technology, but the very idea of unity. He didn't speak of victory. He spoke of endurance, of holding the line long enough for Africa to believe in itself. And as the meeting ended, thunder rolled across the desert, though no clouds moved in the sky. The final preparation began. Every system was calibrated, every network synchronized. The hum of energy beneath the sand grew stronger, like a heartbeat echoing across the continent. Even nature seemed to sense it. Animals migrated strangely. The night sky shimmered faintly, reflecting invisible signals dancing through the atmosphere. And in cities across Africa, people began looking upward, drawn by a force they couldn't explain. Some said it was science. Others said it was destiny. But deep down, everyone knew the world was about to change. Europe's media laughed. They called Umoja Africa's dream project. They showed footage of poor villages and mocked the idea of unity through technology. But behind those smiles was fear, because Europe's own satellites were starting to fail intermittently, their signals disrupted by unknown interference. In intelligence circles, one phrase began circulating quietly. The Sahara is no longer silent. And then, the leak. A senior advisor inside Niger sent a classified report to a Western think tank, claiming that Umoja's system could potentially blind Western drones and satellites permanently. Within hours, the document reached every major capital in Europe. Panic set in. They now believed Umoja was not a shield, but a weapon. NATO convened an emergency session. And while politicians debated strategy, covert teams began positioning near African airspace. The alliance had no choice. They had to prepare for defense. For the first time in modern history, African nations coordinated military protocols across borders without Western oversight. Shared radar data, linked communication, unified command. It was clumsy, imperfect, but it was history. By the end of May 2025, the continent stood divided, half starving, half awakening. Within the deserts, Project Umoja pulsed with silent power. In European boardrooms, fear took the shape of arrogance. They still believed they could contain it, but Traoré had already seen too much. He knew containment was impossible, because Umoja was no longer his project. It had become Africa's soul. He stared at the map once more, glowing lines stretching from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Every pulse, every connection, every spark told the same story. Africa was learning to move as one. And though the storm was coming, Traoré stood calm, knowing that sometimes, to awaken a continent, one must walk straight into the thunder. The world thought it was building armies to fight Africa. But Africa was building something far greater, a heartbeat that no weapon could silence. By early 2025, the world could feel something shifting, like the silent pull before an earthquake. Burkina Faso had been quiet for too long. The sanctions, the cyber blockades, the broken trade lines, all meant to suffocate the small, landlocked nation. Yet somehow its voice grew louder. From the ashes of embargo and isolation, Ibrahim Traoré's plan began to breathe. In the shadows of Ouagadougou's rebuilt central district, teams of African engineers gathered under secrecy. They came from every corner of the continent, from Lagos to Kigali, from Nairobi to Accra. They spoke different languages but shared one goal: to build the unthinkable, a defense network that would make Africa untouchable. The European Union thought it was bluff, a mirage of African pride. The IMF called it symbolic posturing, but deep underground, beneath the dust of Burkina's red soil, something truly revolutionary was coming alive. They called it Operation Niamey. After the Akan word for God, it wasn't just about weapons. It was about liberation through innovation. At its core was a technology never before seen on African soil. A defense grid powered by solar resonance and magnetic levitation, capable of shielding entire zones from aerial surveillance or attack. It combined African mineral ingenuity with quantum research quietly, shared by sympathetic scientists from the East. No one knew exactly who leaked the designs, but whispers spoke of a collective of black engineers from forgotten labs in the Caribbean. Uniting under a common vision, Ibrahim didn't need permission. He gave only one order: Africa will not beg for safety. We will build it. Each participating nation sent their brightest minds: mechanical engineers from Ghana, code specialists from Kenya, and metallurgists from the Congo. They operated in silence, cut off from the internet, communicating only through encrypted physical relays smuggled across borders in humanitarian trucks. The project's heart lay in a mysterious underground complex, beneath the cliffs of Banfara, a site so secret even most Burkina citizens didn't know it existed. It was guarded by elite units, not with heavy guns, but with loyalty. When satellite images first detected new construction across Burkina Faso and Mali's borders, alarm bells rang in Brussels. Reports flooded NATO channels. Burkina Faso constructing unidentified magnetic structures, possible missile facilities, presence of non-African technology components, but their analysts were confused. There were no visible weapons, no silos, no aircraft, just geometric towers glinting in the desert sun, like monoliths of glass and steel. Europe sent warnings. Then sanctions, then threats. Still, Ibrahim Traoré stayed silent. His media appearances vanished. His speeches stopped. He appeared only once in 3 months, during a stormy night address on state TV, where the lights flickered as thunder rolled. He spoke only a few words. When a lion sleeps, it dreams not of peace, but of the hunt. Then he walked off camera. That line alone made headlines worldwide. Within Africa, not everyone supported him. Some leaders accused Traoré of playing God. Others feared a coup. Old colonial powers whispered into their ears, promising security aid in exchange for betrayal. Rumors spread of 3 African presidents planning to expose Operation Niamey to the west, but Ibrahim anticipated it. In one of the most chilling maneuvers in modern African politics, he invited all leaders to a summit in Bobo Dioulasso, under the pretense of unveiling a new infrastructure initiative. There, during the night session, he revealed live footage from hidden cameras showing Western agents bribing African generals, proof of betrayal, broadcast to every delegate in the room. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Ibrahim spoke softly. We can die divided, or rise together. The chains will not break if one link remains loyal to the hand that forged it. From that moment, the tide turned. Those who doubted him began to understand. This was no mere dream. It was a continental awakening. As Operation Niamey neared completion, another mystery emerged. one that captured the imagination of the world. Satellite photos revealed a massive, transparent structure spanning the chasm of the Comoé Valley. It shimmered under the sun like liquid crystal, a bridge made entirely of reinforced, energy-conductive glass. Journalists called it Traoré's Folly, but locals called it the Bridge of Unity. Hidden beneath its surface was the final piece of operation. Niamey, a magnetic conduit linking multiple defense nodes across Africa. The bridge wasn't just symbolic, it was literal infrastructure connecting the continents. New defense grid, the energy pulses running through. It could power entire regions during blackout or redirect electromagnetic interference. To disable drones, no one had ever attempted anything like it. By mid-2025, tension reached breaking point. A European reconnaissance drone entered Burkinabe airspace. Within seconds, it vanished from radar. A week later, a convoy of European advisors on the Niger border was surrounded by unknown local forces and politely escorted out. Media outlets across the West screamed, "Africa declares technological war." Burkina Faso's rogue defense system threatens global stability. Is Traoré the next global dictator? But inside Africa, people cheered. For the first time, they felt untouchable. Children wore pendants shaped like the glass bridge. Mothers sang songs about the sleeping lion who woke up, and across the continent, African soldiers began saluting. Not just their own flags, but a shared symbol, a golden sun rising behind a shield of glass. Then came the mysterious broadcast at exactly midnight on August 4th, 2025, Thomas Sankara's birthday. Every African nation's state channel flickered to static. Then Ibrahim Traoré's voice emerged, calm, slow, unshaken. For centuries, we were told that safety came from others, that peace was a gift, not a right. But tonight, the sons of Africa have forged their own light. Behind his voice, cameras showed something astonishing. Dozens of glowing towers igniting one by one across deserts, forests, and coasts. Each tower sent a pulse into the sky, forming an invisible dome over multiple African nations. The world watched in disbelief. Scientists confirmed it minutes later. A coordinated electromagnetic defense network had been activated across 9 countries simultaneously, powered entirely by solar resonance and terrestrial conductivity. In short, Africa had just built the first self-sustaining continental defense system, and the world had no idea how to respond. In Europe, silence. In Washington, panic. In Asia, military analysts called it impossible. Tech experts demanded blueprints, but Traoré refused interviews. He simply said, "The bridge was never about glass. It was about reflection. Look at what we've become." As dawn broke over Burkina Faso, the glass bridge shimmered, reflecting the first rays of morning sun. Crowds gathered on both ends, waving flags, singing, crying, and somewhere, deep within the control center beneath Banfora, Ibrahim watched the sunrise alone. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd unleashed. The rising action had reached its peak. The storm was here. The world stood stunned, and Africa, for the first time in modern history, stood untouchable. The world woke up to a new sun, one born not from nature, but from defiance. The shimmering domes of light that glowed across Africa during the midnight broadcast had not faded with dawn. They pulsed, quietly, rhythmically, like the heartbeat of a continent reborn. In Paris, emergency meetings began at 5 a.m. In Washington, encrypted lines crackled with fear. And in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré sat in a dimly lit war room, surrounded by blueprints, watching the streams of data from across Africa. Each line on his screen represented a nation that had chosen unity over submission. But unity had a cost, and soon that cost would arrive at his doorstep. At 8:42 a.m., a coded message arrived through the encrypted channel. European coalition ships entering Gulf of Guinea. 5 vessels. No flags, meaning deniable operations. Their purpose was clear: intimidation or worse. Ibrahim's security chief, Captain Diallo, slammed his fist on the table. "They're testing us. They want to see if we'll blink." Traoré didn't answer. He simply looked up at the massive digital map glowing on the wall. Africa's new defense grid, codenamed Niamey Shield. After a long silence, he said, "If a storm comes, let it find us standing." He ordered no retaliation, only observation. He wanted the world to see Africa's restraint, the calm before power. But far from the command center, another battle was already unfolding, one not fought with soldiers, but with secrets. Unknown to Ibrahim, two of his engineers, both trusted, both brilliant, had been compromised. A Western intelligence agency had reached them months earlier, threatening their families abroad. Their mission was simple: insert a virus into Niam's core AI, a worm that would render the grid blind from within. On that same morning, inside the control facility beneath the glass bridge, one of the engineers, Dr. Lamine Coulibaly, hesitated as his trembling hands hovered over the keyboard. He wasn't a traitor by choice. He was a father. The worm was disguised as a system update, one command, and Africa's miracle would collapse into darkness. But fate intervened. Moments before he pressed enter, the screens flickered. A camera feed appeared on every monitor, Traoré himself, live from the capital, speaking to the technicians. "To every builder, every coder, every dreamer who gave your life to this shield, remember this: you are not protecting me. You are protecting the future your ancestors were never allowed to see." Lamine froze. Tears welled in his eyes. He closed the laptop. He had just made a decision that would change the world. But the other engineer, Nuru Kante, had no such hesitation. He uploaded the virus remotely, embedding it deep into the grid's core. Within minutes, warning alarms blared across the control center. Power fluctuations. Grid instability. The Niamey Shield was collapsing from within. By evening, the European fleet had reached the Atlantic approach. They moved without authorization. Their objective: disable the energy towers powering the grid near the Ivory Coast. At 21 hours, they launched a salvo of electromagnetic disruptor missiles, weapons designed not to kill, but to blind. The missiles streaked through the sky, glowing white against the African night. Their impact was devastating. Entire sections of the Niamey Shield went dark. For the first time since its activation, the impenetrable light of Africa began to flicker. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stood motionless before the giant screen. His advisors shouted, demanding retaliation. "We can't let them humiliate us! Authorize counterattack now!" But Ibrahim shook his head. "No, not yet. Power without purpose is just another chain." Instead, he turned to his engineers. "Find the source of the collapse. Someone has betrayed us." Deep below the glass bridge, technicians scrambled to isolate the worm. Then the truth surfaced. The virus originated from Node Delta, the same lab managed by Nuru Kante. Security forces stormed the facility, only to find Kante already gone, a trail of data leading to a private airstrip. He was escaping with encrypted drive copies of the grid's blueprint, the full architecture of Africa's defense. Miracle. But before his jet could take off, a strange phenomenon occurred. The ground around the airstrip began to glow, faintly at first, then blindingly bright. It was the backup circuit of the Niamey core, an auto-defense mechanism Ibrahim had secretly built into the system. The lights converged, forming a shimmering field that surrounded the runway. The jet engines sputtered, then died. Nuru Kante screamed, pounding on the cockpit glass, trapped within a dome of his own betrayal. Moments later, Ibrahim received confirmation. The virus had been isolated, the grid's integrity restored, and with it, Africa's defense shield came roaring back to life. When the Western fleet saw their missiles rendered useless, their communications scrambled, and their satellites blinded by electromagnetic interference, panic swept through command. They had underestimated Africa's resilience. Then, without warning, every major Western communication channel received a broadcast. It wasn't from NATO. It wasn't from the UN. It was from Ibrahim Traoré. He stood atop the glass bridge, the night sky ablaze with pulses of blue light beneath him. To those who still see Africa as land to divide, your era is over. You sent ships. We sent science. You brought fear. We built light. We do not seek war. but we will no longer ask for peace. His voice echoed through millions of devices across continents. In cities from Johannesburg to Dakar, people poured into the streets, waving flags, chanting his name. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about them. A continent had risen. For 48 hours, the world held its breath. No missiles, no speeches, just silence, heavy, expectant. Then something extraordinary happened. European leaders, those who had sanctioned and mocked Africa for decades, requested an emergency peace summit. For the first time in modern history, the venue chosen was not Paris, not London, not Geneva, but Ouagadougou. The symbolism was undeniable. As the summit began, Ibrahim Traoré stood before a global audience. Behind him, the glass bridge shimmered, the ultimate symbol of connection. He opened his speech with a line that would be etched into history. "When we built this bridge, we were told glass is fragile. But even glass, when made from truth, can reflect the light of every star." There was no applause, only stunned silence. And then slowly, the room rose in respect. But amid the triumph, there remained one last secret, one known only to Ibrahim and a handful of engineers. The Niamey shield was never designed purely for defense. Hidden within its energy matrix was a coded sequence, a global reset algorithm capable of neutralizing satellite-based weapon systems anywhere on Earth. It was Africa's insurance, a silent promise that no empire would ever dominate it again. Yet Ibrahim chose never to use it. He locked the code, sealed it within a vault beneath the glass bridge, and inscribed one line on the metallic door: "Power means nothing unless it protects peace." As night fell across the continent, the glass bridge pulsed gently with light, every flicker a heartbeat of a continent reborn. Ibrahim stood alone at its center, his reflection merging with the translucent glow beneath his feet. He whispered softly, as if to the ancestors themselves, "We have waited centuries for dawn. Let it never set again." And as dawn broke over Africa, the first rays of sunlight passed through the glass, scattering into 1,000 colors, each beam traveling outward, reaching every corner of the land. Europe watched in silence. The world was speechless. And Africa had finally spoken. When the sun rose the next morning, it didn't rise the same way. For the first time in centuries, the light over Africa didn't feel borrowed. It felt owned. Across Burkina Faso, people woke to the soft glow of the glass bridge, its surface shimmering with golden light. Children gathered beneath it, touching the warm glass as if it was sacred. Soldiers who once fought for survival now stood in peace, guarding not borders but beginnings, and somewhere, deep inside his residence, Ibrahim Traoré sat in silence, watching the world react. The once isolated leader of a small landlocked nation had, without firing a single bullet, forced the world to look at Africa differently. No longer a continent of pity, no longer a field of extraction, now a power, united, undeniable, and awake. In Europe, the silence turned to disbelief. The morning papers struggled for words. The day Europe lost its leverage. Burkina Faso, the heart that electrified Africa. From aid to authority, the rise of Ibrahim Traoré. Leaders convened in emergency sessions. Analysts screamed across networks, and intelligence agencies began rewriting doctrines. But there was no counter-strategy. You can sanction gold, embargo oil, seize assets, but you cannot sanction an idea. And the idea of African sovereignty had already escaped containment. In Paris, protesters marched carrying signs that read, "Let them build, let them lead." In Washington, senators debated whether Africa's defense system could threaten U.S. influence. One retired general whispered on live television, "It's not a threat, it's a mirror." From the bustling markets of Lagos to the sand-swept towns of Timbuktu, something unexplainable began, a spiritual uprising wrapped in pride. African scientists who once fled to the West began returning home. Universities formed new partnerships across borders. Currency alliances emerged, and for the first time, a Pan-African Defense and Research Union was born. A collective effort to protect the continent, not just from enemies, but from hunger, ignorance, and dependency. Everywhere you looked, hope had a new language. A mother in Malawi said, "My son speaks of bridges, not borders." A farmer in Niger said, "We no longer plant just for harvest. We plant for history." And in a school in Senegal, a teacher wrote on the blackboard, "We were once divided by colonizers. Now we are connected by light." But for Ibrahim Traoré, the victory felt heavier than it looked. The power he wielded had reshaped the world. Yet it isolated him even more. He walked alone most nights across the glass bridge, the hum of the energy beneath his feet resonating with his heartbeat. He often thought of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who dreamed of a free Africa decades before. And sometimes in the quiet glow of midnight, Ibrahim whispered Sankara's words to himself. "While revolutionaries as individuals can be killed, you cannot kill ideas." He realized he was no longer leading a nation. He was leading a memory, one reborn into motion. 3 months later, a global summit was held in Ouagadougou, the same one Europe had once avoided. Delegates from over 50 nations attended. Some came with hope, others with fear, but when the doors opened, what they saw left them speechless. The conference wasn't held in a marble palace or foreign-built hotel. It was held beneath the glass bridge itself, the bridge now transformed into a transparent dome of crystal and solar veins. The floor beneath their feet glowed with energy. Above them, sunlight refracted into 1,000 rainbows. It was as if the entire hall breathed light. When Ibrahim entered, the room fell silent. He didn't walk like a politician. He walked like a man carrying centuries of weight and refusing to drop it. He began his address softly. "When you look through this bridge, you see the sky, not walls." For too long, Africa was asked to choose between silence and survival. Today we choose something else, existence with dignity. His words were not loud, but they carried thunder. Even those who once called him dangerous listened in silence. Beneath the bridge, inside the hidden vault that contained the sealed Niamey core, engineers monitored readings from across the continent. The system was stable, self-sustaining, unhackable. And in a symbolic gesture known only to a few, Ibrahim ordered the main control terminal, the one capable of weaponizing the grid, permanently sealed. He watched as molten glass fused the steel door shut. "Let no man be tempted by dominion," he said quietly. The Niamey shield would remain a guardian, not a sword. It was the greatest act of restraint ever shown by a leader with such power. In the following months, unexpected miracles began to unfold. Countries once hostile to each other signed mutual defense pacts. African students abroad formed return-home programs, volunteering to bring back knowledge instead of remittances. Media outlets shifted from Africa in crisis to Africa in control, and beyond politics, something deeper took root, a belief in Kenya. A child asked her father, "Papa, do you think the bridge goes to heaven?" Her father smiled. "No, my child. It brings heaven here." But even light casts shadows. Traoré's relentless devotion came with a cost: isolation, exhaustion, and endless threats. Several assassination attempts were foiled. Spies were uncovered. Western intelligence still called him a volatile anomaly. Yet he remained unbroken, because he had already accepted that the bridge he built was never for him. It was for those who would cross it long after he was gone. One evening, standing at the bridge's edge, Ibrahim looked out across the horizon and whispered to his aide, "When I fall, make sure the bridge never does." His aide nodded, tears in his eyes. By the end of 2025, Africa's defense grid had transformed into something even greater, a continental cooperation system, protecting digital infrastructure, food networks, and satellite communications. Western alliances no longer dictated terms. They negotiated partnerships. The IMF quietly adjusted its tone. The World Bank began consultations for equal trade frameworks. And Europe, once speechless, began to listen. No more threats. No more ultimatums. Only an understanding. Africa had awakened, and this time it would not sleep again. Months later, Ibrahim Traoré recorded a final message for the archives, to be played only upon his passing. It was short, simple, hauntingly beautiful. If the world remembers me, let it not be for strength. Let it be for patience, because power comes to those who wait, but peace belongs to those who build. When the message was one day broadcast, millions cried. The glass bridge became a place of pilgrimage. Tourists from across continents came to see the bridge that once divided, now connecting. Its surface reflected not faces, but futures. Years later, a child would ask in school, "Teacher, who was Ibrahim Traoré?" And the teacher would smile gently, replying, "He was the man who built a bridge so strong. Even light chose to walk across it." As the class looked at the hologram projection of the shimmering glass bridge, still pulsing with energy decades later, the child whispered, "He didn't build a bridge. He built Africa." History will say that once upon a time, a man from a small forgotten land looked at a broken continent and saw not weakness, but possibility. They called him reckless. They called him naive. But when the world tried to break Africa again, he made it unbreakable. And so, from the deserts of Mali to the ports of Ghana, from the jungles of Congo to the glass bridge of Burkina Faso, the dawn rose not for one man, but for 1 billion souls. This was not just a defense breakthrough. This was the rebirth of a people. Cue orchestral swell. Fade to sunrise over the shimmering bridge.